Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Truth Will Set You Free show. I'm your host, Linda Diane Wattley, and this show is brought to you by TLBTV and the Liberty Beacon Project. And I always am excited with all my guests. And today's guest is Maura Sweeney. Sweeney, right?
Yes, that's right.
She is the ambassador of happiness. And I have to admit one thing, even before I start researching her and reading her books, just getting her emails, I felt something special. And she is so in tune with you. It's like she's right next to, okay, I go get it, I'll do it. And she makes my job very easy. She's a podcaster, an author. She's a contributor of Huntington Post. She's an international speaker. She talks about living a happy life. It's her goal to get people to a better place. It's a beautiful goal, and she fulfills it. She's an amazing author. Her happiness series is phenomenal. She believes in storytelling. She believes that when you tell stories, that it allows for people to get in touch with themselves. She wants you to come in and she wants you to come back out happy. And that's her main goal, is having people to go in themselves and realize that they can come out very happy. And like she says, it's not just a tag, a lifetime. It's a lifetime pursuit that she has. So she's not just talking about be happy. Oh, don't worry, be happy. It is something that we owe ourselves. And she does a great job in sharing this. And I am just so excited to have her on my show. How you doing, Maura?
I am thrilled, and thank you for having me. And I never heard anybody say she invites you to go in so you come out happy. When I said it's living happy from the inside out, that might even be a better way to explain it, Linda. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here tonight.
But I'm just saying you generate it. It's just so amazing. But where I want to start at, because a lot of times people don't realize the work or the desire that people have that get them to these positive and powerful places. And as I was reading your information, I learned that when you was a child, you was a dreamer. You had a desire to give people things of betterment. Just as a child, and it wasn't that you wasn't provided for anything like that, but you always felt like an oddball. Why did you always feel like an oddball?
You know, maybe because I'm left-handed. I'm not sure. And I always saw things differently. I truly was a dreamer. I could remember, always wondering why I had to walk on 2 feet rather than being able to fly. I used to wonder why I was tethered to the ground rather than feeling free and able to move. I could remember looking at airplanes and looking at clouds in the sky and imagining visiting people from every nation, every culture around the world, and seeing them and envisioning them in all of their differences and variety as my unmet friends and relatives. I actually convinced my brother once, we were little, like preschool, to dig a hole in our backyard, because I don't know if you remember this story when you were growing up, but if you dug deeply enough, you would meet the people on the other side of the world, which in our case, growing up in New Jersey, was supposed to be China. And so this is all I could think about, is how can I get to meet all these other people that are my relatives? And that belief in my system and that sense of expansion for the heart and for a world that was not divided, but had many great varieties. But in my mind, the varieties were like the spice of life. They never left me. And so they remain with me today. And I'm glad to say that I have traveled to about 60 countries. And that was from having a childhood where I oftentimes felt like I was kept indoors or chained to the front stoop. And so there was a lot of overcoming, but in the process of the overcoming, I ended up finding my own sense of happiness and authenticity, which obviously I use to inspire others to do the same.
And the thing that I wanted you to share with me was, why did your grandmother, I think it was your grandmother, call you water drops?
Waterworks.
Wow.
Waterworks, if you want to think about when you have a fire and they have the fire hose and it would come out, she would say to me, Maura, I'm going to start calling you Waterworks. You cry at the drop of a hat. Now, we lived with my grandmother after my maternal grandfather passed away. And she was a real feisty lady, and she was always around, but she was so honest, almost like an in-your-face honest. And she would say to me, and very rightly so, she'd say, Maura, you're always crying. I'm going to call you Waterworks. And Linda, it was true. I, especially, let's say from age maybe 8, 9, up to 11, 12, I'm not sure. I used to cry a lot. Now, maybe I cried before that, I'm not sure, but I saw a lot of death when I was younger. Oftentimes I felt like I was living in a box and not free to play with the friends outdoors like I wanted to, or to learn how to dance and just be frivolous in my ways. And I was usually, learning how to play the piano or writing thank you notes and wearing, collared shirts that went up to here. So it was, in many ways, I was a free spirit who felt very confined. And so with a lot of these things, seeing a lot of death, a lot of end-of-life scenarios, and being left-handed, as in seeing the end of life first, I took a lot of thought, and I thought, you know what? I may not be free right now to do what I want to do, but I'm going to grow up to be happy and free. So what you see now with my energy, and a lot of people say the same thing, you would think I go around and I fly and I kiss butterflies everywhere. But, but the truth is, it has been I would say, a lifetime of conscious decision-making that I would use wherever I was and make the best of it. And also, even in my places of, let's say, restriction or limitation, would somehow turn it around to all be a benefit to me. So does that sort of answer the question?
That kind of brings me to something I was curious to understand too. You said you later learned something that you immediately forgave an elder person for.
Oh, wow. Did I tell you that? There's so many, it's funny. I think in life, you have so many experiences, and especially with me, I've done so much over the years. I forget who I tell what to. Yes. I was probably in my latter 30s, and I realized one night that I had been inappropriately touched. Let's use the nice word, right?
Okay.
By someone when I was a preschooler. I never connected the two until all of a sudden, all I did was lift up a prayer one night when my husband reached under the covers to touch me, and my reaction was almost violent. I wanted to punch him, and I thought, he's my husband. I don't want to punch my husband. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't say a word. Later that night, as I was putting my head down to sleep, I just lifted up a quick prayer, and I said, Father, what was that emotional reaction I had all about? And I got a flashback to when I was a preschooler, and there was a friend of our family always around. And he had me in the back of a car once with no one else there, and had me stand up and wanted to show him how tall I got, and had his hands underneath my dress into my underwear. Well, anyway, here I was, my later 30s. And as soon as I saw the image of this man, it all came back to me. And my first thought, even though I remember always having some level of anxiety in let's say, in intimate situations, was forgive him, Father, he didn't know what he did. And I felt so happy, Linda. I felt so happy that I could have known the truth, or let's say the source of where my anxiety was coming from. I was so delighted. And in my mind, this is, I would say, a secret to happiness, and also a secret to peace, is to make one decision, one in life, and make it over and over again. Whoever it is, whatever it is, whether it was real or happened in our imaginations, it's forgiven. And there's a lightheartedness that comes as a result, because I'm sure you had algebra in school. I don't know why, but I think of it as an algebraic equation. Remember in math, they would say, whatever's on one side of the the equal sign has to be on the other side of the equal sign. Somewhere along the line, I realized if I'm going to hold anything against another person, I am equally holding something against myself. So if it's condemnation, unforgiveness, a chip on my shoulder, resentment, victimhood, whatever, if I'm holding it out against someone else, I'm doing the same inside my own psyche. And so one decision, it's over. And it seems it's simple, not always easy, but it goes a long way to happiness and, let's say, peace of mind, peace of heart, and an ability to really navigate through life and a lot of the curves that we get.
Yeah, I found that fascinating how you just instantly kicked that line out once you realized what had happened to you.
Me too.
Like, wow. But it seems like to me what you basically did was you chose what was best to carry in yourself.
Yeah, probably so. And I would say this goes back to my childhood too. And I say I saw a lot of end of life scenarios. Just a lot of people died when I was little. And so having that ability as a small child to see people, let's say the human condition when it's over or at the end. And I noticed some people were living out their truth, and they had a very, they felt lighter, brighter, more empowered, versus some people who lived life like a victim or like, oh, this happened to me or this isn't good. I made the decision that I would grow up to be happy and free. And a lot of that had to do with being true to myself. And I would say, when I mentioned I was a free spirit, I think to be true to myself and to be a free spirit would require that I wasn't going to let any of that stuff stick on me.
Wow, and you really don't.
It doesn't feel so good.
And you had a blessing coming to your life too when you was 8 years old, running to all those books. I know how that felt because I remember when I was a teenager and I discovered all the books my grandmother had, and I spent all those months just reading everything she had. It was just so transforming. Share with us how that impacted your life.
All right, was this the book of biographies, right? I think it was the book of biographies. All right, I'm sure many people could relate to this. When I was growing up, I would always look at books, but I was looking for the pictures. I would look at books and say, how many pictures are there and how few words? So I wasn't much of a reader. But one day, I discovered in our 5th grade library a series of biographies. They might have been American biographies or world biographies, and they were designed for young readers. And so each one of those books was transforming me into a different place, a different time period, a different life, and all the settings that went around it. And as you know, in every biography, it starts with childhood. So here I am, a young child, and I am following the story so intimately of people that had challenges, they had desires, they had things they needed to overcome. Maybe they had some ideas in mind, and they had many ways or things they had to go through to overcome those challenges. And ultimately, they would change society. They would establish nations. They would start new movements. They would change the way people thought. They would create cures. So in all of these things, Linda, I'm reading these stories, and for me, it was literally like going inside the lives of people that were making the world a better place. And for me, I think as a young person, I was always looking for inspiration and for leadership. And I found both of them in this series. I loved it so much, and I think I probably derived a lot of life lessons from it, namely one of them being this: when you have a dream, keep going for it. And number 2, it could be the very challenges and sometimes your biggest challenge in life that becomes the catalyst to your greatness. And they stuck with me. And I remember by the time I got there were like 3 more books, 2 more books, 1 more book, and the last book in that library was over. And I thought, now what am I going to do?
So when did you actually decide to put words into a book?
Ooh, I was very quiet, very reserved in a sense when I was growing up. And I think I kept a lot of my thoughts to myself. In fact, the first time I ever started writing anything, I don't think I could write this small anymore. I had the ability to write in such minuscule type. I mean, so tiny that you'd almost need a magnifying glass to see it. It really wasn't until I was in my 50s, Linda, that I started writing for the world, let's say. Prior to that, I would write at corporate. I was a recruiter, which meant I had to do lots of writing of people I was presenting. I was editor of a newsletter for a recruitment firm. And I would do things like that were kind of writing, but writing for the benefit of another. But to actually step out and write my own thoughts, that was huge for me. But it came when I was in my 50s. And if I could offer this, and maybe someone's listening to this today, and I hope it's helpful, I found myself sometimes at night, I'd be lying in bed and laughing. And I'd be laughing about maybe some life stories. And I thought, well, I can't fall asleep. Let me go to the computer and I'll start writing. My first blog I ever wrote was called, of all things, Tombstones. Tombstones, which seems, how could the ambassador of happiness write about tombstones? But it was about, how would I like to be remembered? And I actually had some fun stories in the middle of it. And so I started writing these life stories, and believe it or not, as I was attending a writer's workshop, we'd have to go and read our things and listen to others. Several people in the workshop, including the facilitator, said to me, Maura, you're not telling the truth. And I remember thinking, what do you mean I'm not telling the truth? They said, you are hiding. And Linda, believe it or not, I knew I was called to write. I knew I was called to share life stories that would be transformative. But how do I write a life story that sometimes includes other people, because our lives intersect, right? And growing up, oftentimes where I was taught to, let's say, cover over for other people's bad behaviors or compensate, I was busy trying to write stories. And in a sense, I was a cover-up and I was not telling the truth. So I had to go back and think, you know what, if I'm called to write, I'm going to need to learn how to tell a story, but to tell it truthfully and also tell it in grace. And frequently I tell a lot of my stories with humor. And so that enabled me to get the truth out there, so that it was not only refreshing for me, but hopefully instructive and empowering for other people that deal with the stories of their own life. But it also wouldn't be designed to harm anyone in a negative sense.
And you also know how to do your stories and ask the right questions to get people to the right places to have stories within themselves.
Yes. I think I grew up asking questions. I think this is probably one of the difficulties with me. Again, whether it was I was left-handed or because I saw the world differently, I would ask questions that to me were so obvious, Linda. And people would look at me and say, well, that's the way it's always been. And I would say, well, it might be the way it's always been, but it doesn't make any sense. There's no logic to it. And so adults would oftentimes be, do I say put off or surprised, let's say, by the transparency of my questions. And I think that's probably one reason why I learned later on to be quieter. But I have loads of questions when I was at university, and I would be one of those students that would read, but I would read for understanding. And if I'd find an inconsistency, I'd want to go deeper to find out what is that truth, the rock bottom truth that we could all hang on to. And I think it's just the way I'm designed. And so what I do with people is they may tell me something and I'll turn it into a question to make them explore their own belief in truth, or their weddedness to truth and their willingness to look at it in new and refreshing ways.
Well, what kind of people or individuals actually personally seek you out?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't think you could look at them as an age or any specific demographic. What I've noticed is that it's everyone from college students who are thinking about life, where are they going to be, what do they want to become, to young people who are trying to figure out their value systems, to midlifers who maybe are struggling with change. Maybe they saw themselves as one identity and then suddenly maybe they lost their job, they lost their spouse, they lost their house, and all of a sudden they're thinking, who am I and what am I all about? The same is true even with older people, but it's people in business. I heard just from someone a few hours ago. I spoke at a very large corporation a few weeks ago to their women's group because they were looking to empower all the women into senior management. And I think this was a man that attended the meeting, and he just said to me, I so enjoyed the pictures you showed us, the questions you asked, and the way you brought out seeing things from a new perspective. So I never know who it is. Sometimes there are people that have fought in the war in Afghanistan. I had another guy he was from foreign land. I had another man who was very high up in the military who's following all of my things. So it's a very eclectic group, but I would say these are people that want to know more, and for some reason tend to like my questions and the stories and then the calls to action that go as a result of that.
Wow. Well, tell me this, because I know a lot of times I'll just be smiling. And somebody will say, what you smiling about? Do I have to explain to you why I'm smiling? Have you ever noticed people who kind of can't stand your happiness?
Yes. Yes. I would say, there are people, they want to be miserable, and maybe, or let's say some people do want to be miserable and they do want to be victims. And they want to complain. So obviously I would have nothing to offer them. And it doesn't mean that I am not sympathetic or even empathetic to other people. But I will tell you on the contrary, that I could go, whether it's to New York City or to somewhere else around the world, and I could be walking down the street and somebody will be in a car waiting at a light and they'll look at me as if they're waiting for me to smile at them and say hello. Mm-hmm. So there is something in people's energies where they're attracted to like energy, and they enjoy it, just like with you. Now, you may have some people questioning you, but I'll bet there are other people, Linda, who are very drawn to you because your spirit is uplifting. And generally that kind of a spirit is very allowing. It's very expansive. And there are people that really enjoy being in that kind of an environment.
Wow. You have written a series, the Art of Happiness series, and you have written several books. Out of all the books that you have written, which one seems to be the most universal?
Ooh. I could say it's the first in the series because I've often talked about it. It's called Exiting the Comfort Zone. And I think everybody could relate to this one. That was the very first book I read when I wrote. And in my case, it was the story of me at almost 50 years old, stepping out, going to school at a local college to learn how to dance, something I always wanted to do from watching American Bandstand as a 2-year-old and never getting the opportunity. So I want you to imagine that in every case, we all have a comfort zone. It's where we grow up. It's the mindsets we carry. It's our area of expertise. We sort of know all the rules and we know how to conduct ourselves within the confines of that. But step out of that comfort zone and suddenly our ego gets challenged. We get afraid. We think maybe people won't like us. We think we'll look foolish. We think we'll fail. And yet there's something in this stepping out of our comfort zone when it's a call from our heart that says, this is something you always wanted to do or to explore or to become, as in a bigger version of yourself or a more expressed version of yourself that is universally appealing. And people have read my story of trying to learn how to dance at age 50, thinking I'm too old, too love feet. I almost destroyed an onstage performance at the local college. And people, I get finished with that book and they laugh. It's like a bad episode of I Love Lucy. But they finish reading it. And see, as stories help us relive the elements of our own life and what we tell ourselves, people have come out of that and said, Maura, if you could learn how to dance at age 50 and counting, I could run the world. And I think for that reason it is universal. Everybody knows there's something in them that's just longing to get out and longing to step out.
And you had also said one of the things to getting to happiness is to remember when you were a child, what were you doing or what was you experiencing that actually made you happy? Now,
So,
what if they don't have a childhood memory that actually made them happy? Where do you take them from there?
that's a good question. The reason why I go back to childhood is that we all come into the world, and if you could remember at this point, no, but you're not familiar with all the rules. You have to actually learn the rules of life. And within learning those rules, you also learn the limitations. You learn what is acceptable, what's unacceptable, let me say it this way, what's preferred. So when you think about being a very young child, you could go through books. What do you want to be when you grow up? Or you go through, and your imagination is huge. And the reason why I invite people to go back to that time period is that when they're young, they've not been told yet what they can't do or what they can't dream about. And so what I always tell people to do is put your hand over your heart one day, close your eyes, breathe, just say, by putting your hand over your heart, you tend to move the attention away from the intellect and everything we've been taught by man, and you go back to your soul. Now, maybe it's not necessarily preschool like it was for me before I learned what I couldn't do. But maybe it's at a time when people are 9, 10, 11. Maybe they are in high school. Maybe it was even yesterday. But the important thing is this: if you close your eyes and allow yourself to think about, this is my first question, what were you doing or playing or creating or imagining when you were a small child? And the moment a smile comes to your face, this is why it's living happy from the inside out. The moment a smile comes to your face, stay right there, because those tend to be the callings of your heart, the inner sense of identity from your soul. And oftentimes we don't even, in this very busy and complex world where we're always trying to follow what the experts tell us, we don't consult with our own heart. So maybe that heart could speak to us when we were very little and bring us memories, or maybe it'll bring us back to, again, it could be maybe in 9th grade and all of a sudden you're working on some artwork that makes you so happy. Find those things and go back to them and look for whatever ways you can to start working on those things or pursuing them or extrapolating something from them to give them life. And as we give them life, we actually give ourselves new identity and a better sense of self and fulfillment and joy.
Okay, so when you first wake up in the morning, you don't feel the same every day. So when you talk about happiness, do you regulate yourself to see where you are,
Yes.
to see what you have to do to kick it back in?
Yes.
Or do you
do.
allow yourself to have down moments?
I've had plenty, which I think has given me lots and lots of experience practicing the state of being happy. The first thing, and I know you probably referenced this at the beginning, sometimes people misunderstand happiness and they think, oh, I'm going to buy a new car. Oh, I just got a new ring. Somebody just invited me out to a date, therefore I'm happy. But happiness is a state of being, or let's say this way, it's a state of mind. And so I can remember, Linda, from the time I was a young child, and again, feeling like I didn't really have all the liberty that I wanted. I can remember going into my bedroom thinking, okay, Maura, you're either going to keep crying and be miserable, and you don't like this, or you can think of something better. Again, think from the inside. And I would concentrate on not what I couldn't do, but what I could do. I would think about what was positive for where I was rather than what was negative. And I want to add something further. For about a decade, I had, in my own estimation, a challenging position. I was working in corporate America in management in a very fast-moving industry, and I at some point had a couple of offices. And I would be in the office, and I had all these people depending on me, and I had a corporation behind me that was always expecting more and more. So I would purposely get up early, extra early in the morning, even though I might have been leaving at 7:30 to get in my car. And it would be my time to reflect, to listen, to pray, to remember something, let's say a word that was important, that would keep my mind steady, knowing that when I went into the office and I was going to have maybe 25 people coming at me, that I could dictate or define the environment rather than having every problem that came pull me off mark. And I always felt that I was responsible for so many people that it was that I needed to learn how to be stable, sensible, and I would say to have my own sense of peace, because it was from that place of peace and clarity that I could make the right decisions, and that I could cause a rippling effect in terms of how I responded, how I planned, how I spoke to people, how I enabled people to get through their own issues. So I would say that whole idea about the morning or that time each day of regulating myself, I did it out of necessity, but it's a part of me now.
I see that. It's like this time of day, you still seem like it's like morning.
That's because I showered after I worked out about an hour ago.
It seems like it's still like morning the way, I mean, you just bubbly like that, because I've seen you online and you just carry that in your spirit. It's like people would have to sense that they want it, you know?
Oh, there are people that, you know what? This is an interesting thing. People will ask oftentimes if I'm a one-on-one coach. I do very little of that, Linda, because my energy actually comes from, see this exchange we're having? And I know that other people are listening. There is something so expansive and energizing to me that I actually do get more uplifted. But put me at my desk or just by myself at my computer, my husband will say, Maura, you're getting a little bit crabby. It's time to get out and see people. And so that's like a fix every day. I need my private time, but I also need to be out around people. And it's very, I get energy from being with other people, especially other people that are looking to grow and wanting to see maybe the better in life or hopeful. I connect a lot with that, and hence your show.
And one of the books that you have written dealt with values. What basically did you want people to embrace about that one?
Well, do you know, we talked earlier about my always asking questions, and I could go back to my years in corporate life. I would sometimes query the sales reps or people that were coming in during the morning as they would pass my office, and I would ask them a question. And oftentimes it was usually about something in the news, and they would give me a very pat answer. It was almost like the soundbite they heard the night before listening to the news or what they read in the newspaper. Then I would ask them a secondary question, and they would have to think a little bit longer because maybe they didn't catch what they were supposed to think. Sometimes then I would introduce new information, and then they didn't realize that they didn't know why they felt the way they did about the value they just mentioned. And here's why what I discovered, Linda. Most people assume that the values that they parrot belong to them. It's just that they've heard it all the time, maybe sometimes from peer groups, from things they've been told at home, from beliefs they've been holding on to, but they never went inside to say, how do I feel about that? Is that important to me? And does that resonate for me? Is that truth for me? So when I wrote the book on values, I said everybody has values of their own, but they need to find out what they are. And when we can live according to our value system or a value that's important to us, like courage or strength. Some people will value creativity. Some people value nature and outdoors. In my case, I value truth. So I write the story to ask the question, what do you value? And how do you even discover what your values are? And then I talk about how our connection with values that are near and dear to our heart actually help empower us and then help us to live a happier life because it's more authentic. And in my case, I've been this way since childhood. I love the truth. Even if it's challenging, I love the truth. And isn't that your show? Something like the truth will set you free?
Exactly.
I think what I wrote to you, that might have been the word I used. But the truth for me, it's so freeing. It's like, give me all the information. Or even if, like that one guy that I learned had had his way with me when I was a little girl. it was unmasking something that was hidden from my what I would say my conscious mind. But as soon as I found out, I was happy. I felt like, wow, now I know I was behaving that way. So for me, truth is a really big thing.
That's wonderful. And how many books have you written under the Art of Happiness series already?
There are 6 books in the series, and every one of them deals with common things we all deal with in life. You know, what's our comfort zone? What are the people that have influenced us in life, and do we realize what an influence we are? I have a book on judgment. You know, where have we judged, and where have others judged us, and how could we get past it? I have a book on oh my goodness, competition. How often are people taught that they need to compete negatively with other people, and in the end they end up having a worse sense of self rather than a better? I have one book on nonsense, because life is not complete without a little bit of nonsense. So there's 6 in the series. But the other thing, Linda, that I've done that to me was like massive, it took me, I would tell you, like decades of information went into it, but months and months of work putting it together. I have actually a Foundations of Happiness e-course. It would take somebody maybe 3 weeks to get through, and it goes through 20 something modules. It's loaded with things to read, things to listen to, things to watch, and then also questions that are self-study. So it allows people to, and it reads like a book, but except it's interactive and multimedia. But in that sense, that was like, I felt like I was writing War and Peace. And the whole idea is helping people get in touch with their true identity, looking at the backdrop of their mind, which oftentimes determine their life experiences. And if they don't like it, take a look at the truth of what they've been living under and change it. And there's places about forgiveness, finding your talents, working with your talents, redesigning your life when you need to make changes, and walking into your destiny, whatever that may be. So that to me was like the mother of all books, if you want to call it that. But it's called Foundations of Happiness. And it's, as I said, it's a self-study e-course.
So, you know, when you was 8 years old, do you recall one book in particular that set you on your path? Could you actually remember what the story was about?
You know what? I want to give you a slightly different answer that's coming to mind. I was 8 going on 9, and my school teacher gave me a book I didn't want because it had no photographs in it at all, or no pictures. And I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be a hard book. And it was the story of Anne Frank, who was such a young girl during World War II, and she and her family were sequestered, hiding from the Gestapo in Nazi Germany. And as much as I remember first getting that book thinking, oh, it's probably going to be hard and boring, I had no idea. That book was very transformative for me because it gave me, again, I was inside her young world as if I were there, and thinking about the fears that she was dealing with every day about the prospect of getting found and possibly being sent away to a camp, or at that point they didn't know. But at the same time, and this probably goes back to me, little Aunt Frank, found ways to occupy herself and to dream big, and not lose her sense of hope and imagination and expectation for her future. So in the midst of a very challenging life story, I was deriving from her that same, oh my goodness, I would say there's this spirit that overcomes. And it was very, very meaningful to me. In fact, I have to tell you, it was a year ago that I visited Anne Frank's house she's in Amsterdam. And it was fascinating to think, wow, I read this book when I was a little girl, and here I am today, that all the pictures on the walls, and it was very interesting. So I guess I never forgot it.
Yeah, that is a book to remember. You know, I just find it so interesting that you basically talk to audiences, you know, groups of people. And it seemed like you would seem individual type person, one-on-one type person. You just seem like that. I'm
Oh,
kind of surprised to learn that you actually didn't do personal individual counseling, because it seemed like to me you have that gift of instantly connecting to another person.
you, interesting that you would say that. Well, 3 months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, I came back from almost a month of being away. I was in five, four, five. I forgot. It was like I spoke 15 times in 5 countries in Southeastern Europe. And every one of those was to groups, some as large as several hundred at a time. And I think what is interesting about my speaking is that, yes, I do connect with people one-on-one. So I could be speaking to a group of 5, 10, or 1,000 or several thousand, but each person hears me as if they're the only one in the room that I'm speaking to. And I'll share something further. This is a unique thing about me. Out of the 15 times I spoke, and it was universities, it was young leaders from certain countries, it was American Embassy outposts, it was several places I spoke. And there was only one place, Linda, where I was ushered into maybe the provost's office and wasn't able to be there in the room to greet people as they were coming in before I spoke, because I meet people by name. I'll find out a little bit about them. I'll capture a little bit of their personality. I'll always make a connection. That one time that I was not able to meet people before I spoke, I felt like I missed something out on it because I wasn't able to make the one-on-one connections. And so now every time I go out, I make sure that I say, please, can I get in early? You know, sometimes people speak and they want to be hiding behind some curtain somewhere and come out la-di-da. I have to meet people one-on-one as they're coming through the door, get their name, find out something that they're looking forward to in the presentation. And when I get up on that stage, each person feels like I'm speaking directly to them. In fact, I should offer one more thing. Several years ago, I was at some university in Serbia, and they had advertised that I was coming to the university. And there were some people that just decided they were going to come in to listen to me in addition to the students. And some people said to me, Maura, I don't even know what it was that called me here. And even if I didn't understand a word of English, which they did, when you stepped in the room and came to that microphone, I felt like you understood me. So it's something, I think, Linda, I sometimes say this, that wherever I go, and I've been to 60 countries, and I've spoken in a couple of dozen times in maybe 8 or so of them, but wherever I go, I think I pick up people's DNA. And I do, and I think it's in me. And unless I have that chance to speak directly with people, I feel like that we can't relate as well as we want to. But see, even right now, I asked you before we got started, who would be some of the people that would be listening to you today? Because it's my intention and desire to reach people's hearts so that they can see where we are alike rather than divided. And my intention is always to find that sense of unity and always bring everybody up to a higher place of expectation and hope.
And you say you are the ambassador of happiness, but I also find that love is very important to you.
Yes. How did you know that? You must have done a lot of research.
Talk about that love.
Oh, well, I could tell you without love, we really have nothing. You know, I think about the world, and I'd say the world lives in such a state of darkness and fear. I mean, we're always told the story about the other. I grew up and I was afraid of the Soviet Union. You know, I was a Roman Catholic, and Catholics back then were told you can't go to that church because God's not there. So just think of all the different ways people are separated. And that sense of separation is a lack of knowledge. And whenever there is that, there comes in this place of fear because there's a lack of understanding. So what I find is the more I step out, the more people I meet, the more places I go to, even when those places are way outside of my comfort zone, I end up connecting with the truth in other people and they with me. And as those dark spaces, and let's say the ignorance moves out of the way, what is left but love? And love is the ultimate unifier. It's the ultimate unifier. I'm Your questions are bringing up a lot of things today. I'll give you an example. Before I started doing what I'm doing today, I was, let's say, in my 40s. I was a homeschooling mother to our daughter. We were living in suburbia. My husband and I had built up our own company, so we had this comfortable suburban life. And I learned that there was an opportunity for me to go and mentor young girls. They were 14 to 17 who were in jail. And I was so excited. Now, mind you, I didn't know what I was going to say when I went there. And I remember going, and some of these girls, they were, 13, 14, 15. I think they started at 14. But some of them would be pregnant with their second child. And I remember going in saying, well, I'm probably, old enough to be your mom. And several said, no, you're old enough to be our grandmother. There were girls there that had murdered people. There were some that were in a solitary confinement that were destroying others. They were dangerous to themselves and others. But I'll tell you, Linda, it was different for me, but I walked into that place as often as I would go, and the love that I had for those girls, and you can't fool a fooler. These girls, they came from every background. They knew when there was a con job, so I literally had to go in with being my real self. I felt such a deep love for these girls, and the girls felt the same for me. So, I think sometimes there's something to be said when people can break through, when they can step out of their comfort zone, when they can meet people across town or across the world whose lives and backgrounds are different. Now, I'm not telling people to go into the line of fire, but we end up literally becoming conduits for love in the world. And I know that there's a big world behind the one we live in. And if each one of us would use whatever we have at our disposal to get out there and to make some connections, to ask some questions, and to learn about other people's life stories, and to extend ourselves, I think we could have not only different us, but we have a different society and a better one.
And see, the more you talk, the word spiritual.
Yes.
Keeps coming to me.
Well, I remember thinking when I was first writing, it's very hard. Maybe I was one of these people. I wanted to know, what was I going to look like, and how do I conduct myself? And I just thought, I'm going to write from the heart, and I will do only those things that are that come to me intuitively. There are a lot of people, they'll do 3 blogs a week, they'll do podcasts. These are all the things that I do, and they'll do them like clockwork. And I would really sometimes get down on myself to say, I cannot fabricate anything. So everything that comes from me, Linda, will come as a result of a real encounter, or maybe a thought or a question I wake up with in the morning, or something that I was grappling with, or a reminder of something. And I think from that place, it is from the heart and it is from the spirit, but it also becomes the place that people feel themselves in, because it's a higher place or a deeper place, however you want to look at
it. Wow. If someone wanted to contact you or purchase your amazing books, how would they do that?
Okay, the easiest way, first of all, if you're a podcaster and you're on YouTube, if they like podcasts, they could go for Maura Sweeney, my name, Maura Sweeney, Living Happy Inside Out. I'm on iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play and a couple of others. But my website is my name, Maura, M as in Mary, A-U-R-A, followed by the number 4 and the letter U.com. Maura for you, because as my husband says, Maura, I've never met anybody who's an advocate for people like you are. No matter who you are, I'm for you. So they could go to that website. And here's another thing too. If they would like a free copy of my book on values, which explores my truth, which I love, have them write to me. They could go right to the website, mauraforyou.com. It'll say contact Maura, or just write Maura at mauraforyou.com and ask for the book on values and reference your show. And that would be my pleasure to send them a free copy.
And Maura, you are on the Truth Will Set You Free show. Give us the truth to remember you by.
Okay. To remember me by? Okay. If there's one thing that I could leave people with, is that if I could go from being waterworks and a crybaby child who felt so restricted in life, and I actually, in my mid-50s, brought my own childhood dreams to fruition, to be able to connect with the world and help influence the world and become an ambassador for happiness, that may I serve and may I be an example to them that they too can take their inner heart's dreams and over time turn them into a reality, because the world is waiting for people to live happily and authentically from their insides out. How's that? Does that work?
Beautiful, beautiful. I really appreciate having you on our show today.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been so nice spending time with you, Linda.
I mean, you're going to get happy if you aren't happy. Hey, look, we keep smiling enough, we're going to say, wow, I better do something with my smile.
Just remember, a lot of practice, a lot of practice.
And people don't realize it is a work, isn't it?
Not only is it a work, and it's not for cowards, but the thing is, this is the outcome, and it's better than the alternative, right?
I always say, life don't care how you feel, what you're going to do.
That's so true. That's right. So you might as well make the best of it.
Right. Well, thank you, and take care.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure, Linda.
Bye-bye.
Bye.